All right, so get ready because today we are going deep, really deep.
Deeper than you might think.
Yeah, we're talking ancient Chinese toilets,
Not exactly a glamorous subject, I know.
but stick with us. Trust me, it gets really interesting.
Oh yeah, fascinating stuff.
I mean, some of it's pretty mind-blowing.
It makes you rethink some things, that's for sure. Like how we define a civilization, we usually think, well, writing, right.
Right, makes sense.
This scholar, Julie Holland, and she's got this idea, toilets. Maybe they're more fundamental than writing.
Interesting. Toilets. More fundamental than writing. Okay.
Yeah, think about it. Toilets, I mean, they reflect how a whole society thinks about, well, hygiene, sanitation, even how they're structured socially.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so it's not just about going to the bathroom.
It's much bigger than that. It's how a culture deals with a very basic human need.
So where do we even start with ancient Chinese toilets? Were they all the same?
Well, that's the first thing to understand. There's no one ancient Chinese toilet. Like any civilization, they had a bunch of different solutions depending on the time period, social class, where they were located even.
I see.
Some were super practical, while others were surprisingly luxurious.
Okay, practical and luxurious. I am intrigued. Let's start with the practical side. What did everyday people use?
Well, one example is the Hun. It's this system that combines a toilet and a pigsty.
Wait, what? A toilet and a pigsty?
Seems a little odd to us, I know. But it was incredibly efficient. Think about it. The waste goes in, the pigs, they process it. And then whatever's left over, that becomes fertilizer.
Wow.
A closed-loop system. Centuries ahead of its time when you think about sustainability.
That's really thinking ahead. It shows how connected they were to the natural world. It wasn't just getting rid of waste. It was reusing it, making a cycle.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is, this system, it's still used in some parts of China today, in rural areas, a direct connection from way back then to now. Like a living example of how clever they were.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, have we lost something with our modern obsession with throwing everything away?
Good point.
But okay, you mentioned luxurious toilets too. Let's talk about those. I'm picturing like an emperor's toilet, something really fancy.
You're not too far off. There was this wealthy official, Shi Chong, during the Jin Dynasty. He was known for being super extravagant, and he had this toilet. It was so fancy. It was described as a luxurious and exquisite big bed with maidservants attending to. Well,
Maidservants. Wow, that's next level.
it really shows you the huge gap between the rich and poor back then.
Yeah.
While some people were living comfortably, others were still using very basic systems like the Hun.
Right.
But these luxurious toilets, it wasn't just about comfort. It was about status. Showing off. Imagine someone visits Xichang and mistakes his toilet for a bedroom.
Yeah. What a statement.
Talk about making an impression.
Okay, so we've got the practical Hun on one side and this super fancy bed toilet on the other.
Yeah.
What other kinds of toilet did they have?
Well, there's also the bed toilet, which goes way back to the Han Dynasty. So picture this. A toilet built right into a bed-like structure.
A toilet built into the bed. I'm trying to picture it.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a chamber pot under the bed. It was an actual toilet right there in the bed. And get this. Emperor Hanwude, this powerful ruler during the Han Dynasty, they say he would use his bed toilet while discussing politics with his generals.
Wow, that's something else. It really makes you think about privacy, Seems like they had a totally different attitude toward going to the bathroom back then.
Definitely different from today.
But it also makes you wonder, were the generals just being polite, or did they really feel okay talking about important stuff while the emperor was, busy?
It's a good question. It shows you the different social norms and power structures they had back then.
Yeah, that's true.
But it also gives you a peek into the personal lives of these historical figures. We see them as people.
Speaking of personal, I read about something called Hun Xuan. What is that? It sounds kind of futuristic.
It wasn't futuristic, but it was definitely ahead of its time. The Hun Xuan was basically a toilet carriage, a mobile toilet for traveling, used especially by people in the imperial court. Imagine being able to go to the bathroom comfortably, and privately even, while traveling.
Okay, now that's smart. Seems like they were ahead of the game when it came to hygiene and comfort, at least for the elite.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me, did this toilet carriage play any part in history besides giving relief on long trips?
Actually, yeah, there's a romantic connection. Remember Emperor Hanwude? Well, he met his future wife, Wei Zifu, while she was traveling in a Hun Xuan.
Oh, wow, really?
It's just a small detail, but it adds a human touch to these historical figures. Makes you realize that even simple things can shape destiny.
That's a great point. History isn't just dates and battles. It's about people and their lives, relationships, even bathroom breaks. All right, so we've talked about the Hun, this luxurious bed toilet, and this innovative Hun Xuan. What else is there to learn about ancient Chinese toilets?
Well, we've been talking toilets, but what about the other end of the process, urinals?
Yeah, okay, let's talk urinals.
So they had this type of urinal called the hu, which means tiger.
Tiger. Okay.
Yeah, and there's this legend about this famous general, Li Guang. They say he made a urinal out of a tiger skull.
A tiger skull. That's pretty hardcore.
It's a cool image, right?
Ugh.
But historically speaking, it's probably more myth than reality. Like, we always want to tie inventions to these single big events, but usually it's way more gradual and complicated. Still, this story, it shows how popular the Hu shape was for urinals, especially during the Han Dynasty.
Okay, so maybe not a real tiger skull, but the Hue urinal was a real thing. That's still pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And here's a fun fact. The people who carried the emperor's urinal, sometimes they were called tiger bearers, kind of a joke.
Oh, I can see why that nickname would stick. So the Hu was popular during the Han Dynasty, but did it stay that way?
Well, there's a twist. When the Tang Dynasty took over, the name Hu became a problem.
A problem? Why?
Well, the Tang emperors, they had a similar sounding name. So you can imagine how awkward it would be, even disrespectful, to have their name associated with a chamber pot.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
So they had to change the name of the urinal. It's interesting how something as basic as a name can be so important socially and politically.
Totally. It shows how much language and power are connected. Okay, we've covered the thrones and the tigers. But what about the next step? How do they clean up?
Well, archaeologists have found bamboo slips in Han Dynasty toilets. Seems like that was the go-to option.
Bamboo slips. So, kind of like using old newspapers. Make sense? Practical,
Yeah.
resourceful, just like the Hun system.
Right. But here's the thing. There was this practice, the Jingxi tradition, and they believed you shouldn't use paper with writing on it for, well, bathroom stuff. They saw it as disrespectful to the written word.
Oh, that's interesting. A kind of reverence for language, even in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
But was everyone doing this? Or was it more like an elite thing?
Hard to say how closely people followed this. It might have been more of an ideal than actual practice, especially for people who couldn't be too picky about what they used.
Right, when you gotta go, you gotta go.
Uh-huh.
So if they used bamboo slips and written paper was off limits, what did they do?
Well, that's where toilet chips come in. These were bamboo slips made just for bathroom use. Some historians think it might even be tied to Buddhist practices. There are actually instructions in Buddhist scriptures on how to use these toilet chips.
Dedicated bathroom bamboo. Wow, they really took it seriously.
Yeah.
Shows how intertwined daily life and spiritual beliefs were. Are there any stories about these toilet chips, like specific accounts? Those little details that bring history to life?
Actually, yeah. There's Li Yu, the ruler of the southern Tang dynasty, super devout Buddhist. He would smooth out toilet chips for monks, make sure they were comfortable. And then there's Kublai Khan's daughter-in-law. She did the same thing for her mother-in-law. These weren't just about being clean. They were acts of service and respect.
That's amazing. It's incredible to think that toilet paper, which is so basic to us today, could have so much meaning. It really shows you that even the most ordinary things can tell us a lot about a culture's values.
It really does, and it makes you wonder, if toilets mark a civilization, what do our modern bathrooms say about us?
I know, right? It's a big jump from those combined toilet pigsty systems to our bathrooms today. They're almost like spas.
Seriously. All this technology, self-flushing toilets, heated seats, bidets. What would someone from ancient China think about all that? Would they be impressed or horrified?
It's wild when you think about it like that. We've gone from just basic function to almost like worshiping luxury in our bathrooms.
And it's not just the luxury, there's the environmental impact too. All these disposable products, toilet paper, wipes, huge ecological footprint makes that old Hun system seem pretty smart.
Yeah, it really does. Maybe we've taken a step backward in some ways, but let's get back to ancient China for a minute. We've talked a lot about the types of toilets and hygiene, but what about the social side of things? Were there taboos or rituals around toilets?
Absolutely. Toilets were seen as unclean places, places of waste and impurity. They had rules and etiquette to keep contact with those things to a minimum. For example, you weren't supposed to talk while using the toilet, and people would avoid eye contact in those places.
Makes sense. You can see why those social rules would develop. It's interesting how something so natural can become so ritualized, even taboo. But were there any positive associations with toilets? Did they have a place in their traditions or beliefs?
There were. In some ancient Chinese beliefs, toilets were seen as portals to the underworld, like they connected the world of the living with the world of the dead.
Wow, that's fascinating. So toilets weren't just about getting rid of waste. They had a spiritual side, too.
Exactly. And that belief led to all sorts of rituals and practices, like offerings to appease the spirits that were thought to live in those spaces.
It's amazing how something we see as so ordinary could be so spiritually significant. It really shows how different parts of life were connected in those ancient cultures.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I never thought I'd be so interested in the history of toilets. It's funny, something we use every day. And it's got all this hidden history, cultural significance even. I mean, who would have thought toilets had so many stories to tell?
Yeah, it shows how you can't judge a book by its cover, huh? Even the most everyday things, they can tell you so much about a society, their values, their beliefs, how advanced they were.
Thinking back, one thing that really got me was just how many different kinds of toilets there were in ancient China. It wasn't just about, getting the job done. It was about status, art even, spirituality, all mixed into these everyday objects. You see that whole spectrum. Shicheng's fancy bed toilet, showing off his wealth and power, to the simple Hun system, that shows their understanding of living sustainably.
To think that Hun system is still being used in some places, it makes you wonder if maybe in our modern world, we've lost touch with that kind of practical, cyclical thinking about waste.
It's a good question. Maybe there are things we can learn from the past as we try to deal with environmental problems today. The ancient Chinese, they really understood how to work with nature, not against it.
I know. Another thing that stuck with me was that story about the urinal, and how they had to change its name in the Tang Dynasty because, it sounded too much like the emperor's names. A small detail, but it says a lot about power.
It is. It's a sneaky but powerful example of how language and symbols can be used to keep those social hierarchies going, keep things in order. It reminds us that history isn't all about big events and famous people. It's about the little things, the stuff we use every day, the interactions. That shapes our lives.
And it makes you think, what things are we doing today that future historians are going to find strange? Will they be baffled by our self-flushing toilets? Wonder what the heck we were thinking with our disposable wipes.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it shows how important it is to look at history carefully, pay attention to the little things. We might just find out something unexpected about our own culture and values that way.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've both learned a lot from this deep dive. I never would have guessed the history of toilets could be so interesting. It shows you there's always something new to discover, even in the most unexpected places.
That's the beauty of history. There's always something to learn. We just have to dig a little deeper, ask questions, challenge our assumptions, and then we can get a better understanding of ourselves, our world, and this crazy human story we're all part of.
So, to everyone listening, the next time you find yourself in a bathroom, take a second. Think about the history of that space. It's a long and surprisingly fascinating one. You might be surprised by what you find.